Hey everyone, we're closing in on the end of the year. It's DF Direct Weekly number 91. Energies are flagging here, but we're going to power through this one and deliver hopefully a good show. And there's certainly plenty to discuss. So first of all, joining me, John Linneman.
Season's greeting, Rich. It's good to talk to you one last time on DF Direct this year, I think. We're not doing one next week. I don't know. We'll see.
Maybe.
Maybe a special holiday one, but yeah.
Okay. And looking suitably festive, Alex Battaglia.
Hello.
What was that? What on earth?
I was just reading up on something about the holiday season on my laptop here really quickly.
Okay. I was just thinking maybe this was some mechanism to scare children.
It is also that too, but no, I'm decked out. We'll be talking about decked out stuff later on as well too, and I'm excited to be here before the holiday.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's kick off with our first news topic. Not especially a huge amount of information to this one, but it is welcome news nonetheless. Marvel Spider-Man 2, the sequel, for PlayStation 5, initially it's coming. It's got a tentative release date, fall, that's autumn in the UK, 2023. Not too much to say about this other than, John, this is pretty prolific work rate from Insomniac here, right?
It is, and based on what we've seen in the teaser, I would say that the correct subtitle would be Marvel Spider-Man 2 Spider-Man, with Miles Morales and Peter Parker in there. But yes, I commented on this yesterday, and it's just Insomniac's output this generation so far, and in general, actually, their output is kind of insane when you look at it. These guys are really good at turning around games, getting them out on schedule, a relatively bug-free, delivering great game design, beautiful visuals. Like it's an impressive achievement. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, two of their PS5 games were Marvel's Spider-Man, Miles Morales, and Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered, which was, kind of a remake, but still, they shipped 3 games already on PS3 before some of the other big studios have even shipped 1 on this generation of consoles. I'm very curious to see what happens with Spider-Man 2, Marvel's Spider-Man 2. I'm just going to keep doing that. They didn't do that in those court documents, by the way. For the Activision thing, they never put Marvels in there, and I could just see the Marvel lawyers getting really irritated by that. But I guess the big question I have is where is this going to take place? Is it just going to be the same city again that's been upgraded? Are they going to take it somewhere new, like we've seen in some of the more recent Spider-Man films? I wonder. But either way, this is going to be like Ratchet, a PS5 exclusive, so I would assume that some of the decisions they've made in regards to the technology and the environment design will have been made with that in mind, right? So That's exciting.
I'm just curious as to whether they're going to go for co-op on this, since there is both Miles and Peter in there, which I'd love to see. I think it would be what they would call a game changer.
I kind of wish they would play with some multiverse stuff, given how Ratchet went with all the portals and going between the different realities. I feel like they have the capabilities to do that and could do something fun in the second game here. I don't know if they'll do that, but that would be cool, I think.
Well, the whole Spider-Verse thing. Well, that's the other thing, of course. The Insomniac Spider-Man is in the next Spider-Verse movie, which I thought was awesome. I guess the concept of the Spider-Verse and different universes, it's kind of like deep lore at this point. It kind of happened in the comics decades into the run.
Yeah.
And there's still a huge amount of existing material just set within New York for them to mine. So I suspect they'll still be in New York, possibly a bigger New York. I'm not sure if Queens was in Marvel Spider-Man and Miles Morales, and Queens is where Peter Parker lives. So, or at least hails from. So maybe there'll be a bigger New York. I would be quite happy with a city of the same size, but simply retooled, redesigned to be, fully exploiting the PlayStation 5. I just think without the boat anchor of the old console to hold them back, there's a lot of opportunity here to actually produce a really rich experience. That's kind of what we were seeing in that trailer teaser. Where it looked unlike the previous games. Right. It looked richer. It looked more interesting.
I'm excited to see what they do with ray tracing going forward, because I think Insomniac's one of the few console developers so far to really embrace it right from the start and do some amazing stuff with it. And
absolutely.
I'm hoping that they take it one step further this time. Especially, we know they can achieve 60 FPS with it, so I could almost see them having a light ray tracing mode and then a heavier ray tracing mode or something like that. That would be great.
Any thoughts from you, Alex, on what you want to see from this one?
No, I just hard to say, because I haven't actually, other than playing them far enough for reviews, I haven't beaten these games or anything like that yet. So I don't have many expectations, but I'm actually, regarding the Spider-Man stuff, I was surprised that they could do Ratchet and Clank parallel with all the Spider-Man stuff, but Spider-Man 2, I think its development timeframe makes actually quite a bit of sense, because they already updated a lot of the New York assets for Miles Morales and remastered partially on PlayStation 5. So I'd imagine we're going to see a lot of actually similar looking New York, but with just like more fleshed out detail in some areas that are story specific for the next game and things like that. I don't imagine they're going to make it something like you can walk in every building. One, that there's no gameplay purpose to that, and two, there's no reason for that obsessive.
Did you ever go through that phase, Alex? By the way, like, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, I used to think, man, wouldn't it be cool if you could go inside every building, until I realized, like, actually, that's horrible. Don't want to do that. It's a bad idea.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I went through that phase. I definitely had the phase, and I still have it, where I think most things should be destructible. But that's something that's also far off, probably from just like a technology perspective, unless you're Fortnite. And then the things just disappear and replaced by different assets. But but either way, so I'd imagine, I think it makes sense that they could push it out in that time. It's just a matter of like, they have to do a whole bunch of performance capture, like so much, and polish all the cutscenes. I think the gameplay loop is actually probably going to be basically a lot what we saw before with Miles Morales and Spider-Man. Sure.
Okay. Yeah, they've literally given away nothing apart from the teaser from last year.
That's right.
So, everything to play for. We're still going into this one blind. And it's kind of like the way I like it. I think with the previous Marvel Spider-Man, the 2018 game, we actually saw quite a bit of the game over years. And it actually felt like, by the time it finally came out, it was like, wow, it took this long to get this far. But, just announcing it last year and then bringing it out next year, I guess that kind of feels a bit more natural to me.
I think they want to avoid Puddlegate again. Like, they're going to do everything they can to ensure that does not happen again.
I've got to, while we're talking Spider-Man, I've got to highlight Alex's Spider-Man meme in the Portal RTX video.
Good. I'm happy people like that.
Which is just awesome. You use the Spider-Man meme to basically explain hybrid rasterization and RT and path tracing. This is just awesome.
So good.
Thank you,
Spider-Man replaced Turok. Joshua.
Yeah, for that one, I thought it was just germane for some reason. I have no idea why.
I just liked it when the reflected version popped up in the mirror. that was the crowning glory of that. I think that's all we've really got to say about this, except obviously we're hugely excited about it, and more to the point, it adds to a 2023 that's already heaving with big game releases. We're going to be extremely busy, and can't wait to see all of these games, but Spider-Man especially. Got a feeling it's going to be awesome. So brilliant stuff. Let's move on to the next news topic. This one came out of nowhere last night. Essentially, Hideo Kojima Productions, Death Stranding, it's turning into a movie. And not a huge amount of details given other than the fact it's coming. But John, you've completed the game. Can you see Death Stranding as a game transition into a movie?
I mean, I would have said no, but obviously that is happening, so it's difficult to argue with that.
Why? Why not?
So the reason I said is because the game design itself is built around this like concept of loneliness, and that is something that can be communicated in film, obviously. But it's the cinematic moments only work when they're contrasted against those moments of loneliness and going across the landscape and facing those challenges. Like you're on that journey in a way, and it's one of those few open world games where it actually did feel like you were making your way across like a huge swath of land and actually trying to survive in a way. It was pretty engaging in that sense. And just all the mystery and weirdness of it, I feel like that stuff works pretty well within a game, but I don't know, translating that to a film takes a lot of filmmaking skill. It's not an easy task to pull off, right? And Kojima, I don't know how, did they say if Kojima's involved in the film, or is this, I would assume to some degree, he's not going to pass up an opportunity to work on a film, right?
On a film, yeah. But he's been wanting to make films ever since like the first Metal Gear.
Exactly.
So,
my only suggestion though is I think they should cast Jeff Keighley as Norman Reedus. I think that would be perfect.
My word!
I would be in.
I'm just reading the press release here with a view to figuring out
what's
going on, and the answer is not a lot.
Okay.
But it's saying Kojima under his Kojima Productions banner and Lebovici under his Hammerstone Studios banner will develop and produce, with Hammerstone also fully financing. Kojima Productions US and Alan Ungar will executive produce. So Kojima is producer. There's no indication that he's writing.
Yeah.
Or there's not even any indication of the extent to which he's involved with the plot or whatever. I think it's a really curious turn. And obviously Jeff is a lock. But what about Norman Reedus? What about Lea Seydoux?
I think they'd all be in there.
You think?
It would be so weird for people that they're reprising the characters in the second game, and all of a sudden to not use those actors when they're already in the role. It would be so
That's what
bizarre.
they do, right? Like so it doesn't, it really wouldn't make sense to go that way, I feel.
Yeah. And also in the era of like MCU, like it's obvious that it's not about the characters anymore. In a lot of ways, it's actually about the actor inhibiting the characters live beyond the actors, obviously, but like people didn't buy that. Sorry, what's the name of it? Marvel's Avengers game, because it didn't have like your MCU people in it, and then to do that the other way around with a video game adaptation so close to release, I don't think it works.
I feel like the way I would have liked to have seen this go is if Guillermo del Toro were to tackle this as a film and essentially take Kojima's role from the game, but as a film, and then Kojima's like a character in the game. But I think with the creepiness of the world that they made, Del Toro would have been perfect for sort of realizing this, because he can absolutely do extremely weird and evocative film pieces. But I think the thing about Kojima, we always talk about him in film and movies, and I really don't see him making a big splash in the Hollywood sense, because it's specifically the fact that he brings that love of film to the gaming world that makes his stuff so unique. But in the world of film, would it really play? I don't know. It's a tricky thing, but I feel like he's found a nice niche, well, if you want to call it that, for himself, right? Yeah. Where he's producing these ponderous cinematic experiences that are pushing boundaries in terms of just design and storytelling, I would say.
Yeah, for sure.
Because
it seems like interactive media.
You're really into Death Stranding, right, John? Whereas
man, I love it.
I'm kind of latching on more to the ponderous bit of your comment there.
I thought it was great.
What are we pondering?
Yeah.
No, I like Death Stranding too. But I, like John was saying, though, I think what makes it so interesting is actually the parts that break up the cinematic aspects, which actually a lot of especially the game's intro cinematic stuff is actually pretty disconnected from what you're doing for most of the game. You know what I mean? It's because it takes place in those areas you don't actually go spend much time in. That takes place in the inhabited areas. So I think it's it's going to be really interesting to see how this is even translated to film at all.
Okay, I'm still searching for something to discuss in this press release.
I think we've got it.
Yeah, I think we've got it. There was a typo in the main headline, though. Hammerstone Studios and Kojima Productions to partner on film adaptation of Death Stranding.
Adaptation.
Hey, did I write this?
Yeah.
Did I write this?
What they need is the equivalent of me that makes you go and do it again with the proper spelling.
Hey, spelling.
Okay, well, interesting developments for sure, and I'm just going to be very curious on how they do adapt it and the extent to which the original cast are involved. They've kind of got to be, I think.
Yeah, but they would have to be.
Okay, fair enough. Well, let's move on. So yesterday, a really interesting interview with the creators of the Steam Deck emerged on The Verge. Sean Hollister produced that excellent work. And essentially we get a kind of, I don't know, end-of-year report on Steam Deck, what they've achieved in 2022, which, to be fair, has been considerable, and where they're heading next. There's a lot of intricate and interesting detail there, so I do recommend you check out this interview because there's a lot going on there. But they tackle head-on the concept of where they're going to go next with hardware. And essentially, we're going to be seeing some divergence here with what the next generation of non-Steam handhelds are going to be doing, and then what Steam are doing. So the non-Steam handhelds, they're going to be moving on, in fact, they're doing it right now, to AMD's 6800U APU, which essentially has a lot more CPU power, a lot more GPU compute, but also has a considerable power envelope, up to 40 watts. Valve are basically saying they're quite happy with the performance level of the existing Steam Deck. They want to improve battery life. They want to improve quality of life experiences with the Steam Deck, but they don't consider the performance characteristics of the console as something they want to touch in the here and now. So pros and cons there. Alex, what are your thoughts on this?
I think this is a great idea because I have this thing called a smartphone. And I also have another smartphone right next to it right here. And one thing I've always lamented about smartphones is that they just keep getting faster and faster. But why are we not focusing on battery life and quality of life at the same time? Like, I feel like there's a race for power at times that is just unreasonable for mobile devices. And I think keeping the same power envelope and improving quality of life and battery life is way more important than because this is a mobile device. That's what makes it interesting. And keeping it as tethered as it needs to be in the current iteration, it's fine. Like, I've used it on the go, but it's still, I think that's the thing that would bring it up to the next level if they could get something like Switch levels of battery life out of this at some point in the future. Most games that are AAA, even ones that we are seeing that are next-gen only at the moment, are actually running on the Steam Deck currently in some form or capacity. And I think that shows that it's fine enough at the power level it currently is, and it doesn't need to go better. And it could just get better as a quality of life product. And I think that's the way to go. And just hearing that from the interview makes me think they know what's good for their customers. We don't really need more powerful hardware, I don't think, at this very moment.
At this very moment. But John, you're basically interested in Steam Deck, but don't want one because of the quality of life experience in terms of screen and whatnot, right?
Battery life, yeah.
And battery life. So this is music to your ears.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what I was hoping for. Like, the Steam Deck is a really cool product, but having used it, I feel that the screen is just not acceptable for me. Like, I know some people don't care or that they're fine with it, but my standard for screen is like, I'm at a certain point where I just can't tolerate that type of screen anymore. I think it looks terrible. Just a bad LCD panel. And that's clearly where they cut costs before. So the fact that they're specifically addressing that gives me hope. I wouldn't necessarily expect an OLED screen in there. It would be awesome. But, just a high quality LCD panel would suffice. And then of course battery life, because it seems right now playing any sort of decently high end game, the battery life is rather dire. So it's not one of those things you can rely on being, available all the time, because it just runs out of juice real fast. So, but yeah, so you pop that in there. That's basically solving the two big issues with it. And suddenly it's like, it's a fantastic product. It's kind of like, the Switch OLED situation, right? The Switch OLED is not more powerful, but I think it's a much more pleasant device to use. It feels much more premium, and a lot of that's just down to the screen. So I would like to see that for Steam Deck.
Well, Alex, I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
Sure.
From what I've seen so far from Unreal Engine 5, bearing in mind this is the older version of Unreal Engine 5 before it received the optimizations that allowed Fortnite to run on Series S at 60. Mm-hmm. It didn't work on the Steam Deck. The CPU requirement was sky high. The Steam Deck just couldn't cope.
Poor Steam Deck.
So, looking forward, do you think maintaining the power level that it's got at the moment is kind of viable for maintaining decent performance on current gen games.
Yeah, UE5 is definitely a wrench there thrown into the machinery. It's a little bit hard because I haven't tried any UE 5.1 software mode lower settings on it yet. That would be an interesting video. Like, is Steam Deck ready for next gen? And like what? Because Fortnite, I don't know if you can run Fortnite.
I don't think you can. I think the anti-cheat stuff would stop it working, and you'd need it to be running on Epic Game Store as well. It adds further complications. You could certainly test it under Windows. Yeah.
That could be maybe an interesting thing, and say, like with the caveat, this is Windows and it could run better elsewhere, oddly enough. That would be an interesting video in its own right, quite honestly. But yeah, I mean, that is, yeah. So I think it's honestly not the worst, like straight, just my opinion is it's honestly not the worst thing in the world if Steam Deck can't run UE5 games that well.
Yeah, but it does. I mean, virtually every game, every major AAA title is going to be UE5 within a couple of years based on the current trajectory.
So that's the thing, is that I feel like that is true. Playing devil's advocate about this, that could mean that the future viability for AAA games on the deck is compromised. We'll have to obviously test this out. We don't know at the moment. But even if that were the case, I kind of, as a user of a Steam Deck, I wouldn't actually care. Because the things that I find interesting about the Steam Deck are the mobility of playing a massive catalog of PC games that just doesn't include the AAA.
Exactly.
So, like, for me, the things, I haven't played AAA games on it. Like, I'm seriously, I've loaded it up with emulators. I've played, like, older games on it, a lot of older games that I'm just like, oh, it would be fun to play this on the go. I think that's, like, PC strength in a lot of ways, other than just always the AAA ports. So I wouldn't feel that bad about it, but it's something we should definitely probably want to try and investigate at some point in the future, because UE5 is a big question mark.
I mean, I think by the time UE5 games are ubiquitous, they'll be ready for a new generation of Steam Deck, right?
Yeah,
and it's not like PC gamers aren't used to the need to upgrade, right? And the original Steam Deck will continue to play a wide range of games on Steam, as you noted. The library is gigantic. So, the inability to play some of these top-end games, I don't see it as a big deal either. And it's just kind of,
At the moment, at least. Yeah, for sure.
Well, the good news is I've still got Windows installed on my Steam Deck. I didn't switch back to Steam OS, so I might well give Fortnite a go and see what's going on there.
Actually, Rich, though, raising that is an interesting point, because a lot of these other handhelds from other other companies are pushing more powerful hardware than the Steam Deck, and also with a better form factor. But the experience seems miserable. Like, Windows just isn't really nice to use.
It's
on
not
these
a handheld gaming device.
Like, that's the thing that Valve got right with the Steam Deck, is they actually managed to bring the console-like experience to the PC, where it's got proper like sleep modes, and it just behaves, and the way the UI works, it all feels like it's built around the device. It's a very seamless experience versus like, an Aya Neo or whatever. Beautiful looking devices. You can run tons of stuff on there, but the actual user experience is not very good.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it does require a certain degree of, how can you call it? You kind of have to be a hardcore PC gaming guy to enjoy one of those devices, whereas on the Steam Deck, generally things kind of work. The other thing you get, of course, is the shader caches.
Which is awesome.
Yeah. I mean, bearing in mind that compilation stutter is related to CPU performance, and the Steam Deck doesn't have a huge amount of CPU performance, that's a good thing to have.
Very good.
Yeah, so I'm really interested now in trying Fortnite on the Steam Deck. I might do that a bit later, just to see what's what there. From my perspective, I think what's interesting here is that in addition to talking about Steam Deck, they're also just interested in the concept of PC as a handheld taking off. So they're not actually against these 6800U devices that are coming from other manufacturers. And in actual fact, they want to embrace them and bring them into the SteamOS ecosystem, which I think is awesome.
That'd be good. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so, there's a lot going on there. And I think it's just the beginning of the journey for the Steam Deck. And I do think they've achieved what they set out to do, which is to take PC gaming out of the bedroom, out of the office, and basically take it anywhere. And I think the capabilities of the silicon have been vindicated just by some of the results we've seen, like Spider-Man. Just the concept that I could get where it was under Windows, the concept that I could run Flight Simulator and Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition.
Yeah, that's wild.
On a handheld at 30 frames per second is kind of mind-bending. It speaks to the power of the RDNA 2 silicon in there, but also the scalability of PC games and how much performance you can save by running at lower resolutions. Yeah, it's been kind of eye-opening from that perspective, and it outstripped my expectations tremendously. So I think, pat on the back to Valve for doing something really quite interesting here. The sales have been phenomenal as well. They're well north of a million units now, which, for a device you can't buy from Amazon or from a shop, I think is quite remarkable. And audience reaction to it has been really good. The other thing I like about it is that they've embraced the kind of hardcore options that we would want. The 40 hertz display update, for example. It was a masterstroke, That was just really, really impressive. Lots of really interesting things going on there. They are also talking in that interview about the concept of Steam OS essentially transitioning into desktop devices. And we're actually seeing Proton being used in some really interesting ways. Like, this week, for example, Tesla announced that Steam was able to run on a Model S and a Model X. And that's all down, again, to Linux and the Proton compatibility layer there being sort of redirected to another use case scenario. I just think it's really interesting what they're doing. That they're liberating PC gaming from Windows. And I think that's really quite a remarkable achievement. The fact that it actually works as well as it does. But yeah, much more to come from Steam Deck. And obviously, if there is any refreshed hardware, we'll be all over it. But let's move on to the next news topic. Wow, where do we begin with this one? We posted our review of the Radeon RX 7900 XTX and XT. And from my perspective, it kind of did what it was supposed to do, in that it took on the RTX 4080 and had some wins, had some losses, but it's cheaper. Doesn't really move the needle, I don't think, in terms of market share in the PC space. I think Nvidia are going to remain dominant here. But there is the concept of disappointment, of overhyping, and I do think there is a certain degree to which AMD are responsible here with their up to 1.7 times 6950 XT performance. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we actually ended up with around an extra 35% over that. It was up to about 50% on versus 6900 XT. So it's actually a creditable gen-on-gen upgrade, but nothing spectacular as the initial sort of hype was suggesting. Alex, thoughts on this?
I'm just thinking that we need to step back from the leaks and the hype and everything. And this is so this happens across the industry for every single product out there. It's always pretty famous how everyone is like, oh my God, I can't believe the next Dolphin is going to be the best thing from Nintendo. Oh my God, the Switch is going to be so powerful from Nintendo. It happens on Nintendo side, but on AMD on PC, it's it's always every cycle. This is literally every AMD cycle I can think of ever since
every time.
R600 maybe is the first time I really remember the AMD cycle of hype, and then this happening.
Yeah.
Occurring.
Zen 4 was another one, which was massively overhyped.
Massively overhyped, where it's you're going to be getting 2X last gen, blowing Intel out of the water, blowing NVIDIA out of the water, whatever. And I think it's a little bit absurd at this point, and we should just categorically ignore it. And anyone that's falling for it should just be thought of as kind of a dupe person there. It's a little bit dumb at this point. But in regards to the official line, that was one thing where it was interesting. After the official stuff came out, due to that slides from that presentation and the presentation itself, I was already actually, RDNA 3 in the form that it's currently coming out in these chips seems a bit disappointing. And if you go back to that DF Direct Weekly, I'm saying, oh, this feels like a transition architecture based upon their power, performance, and noted architectural changes. And lo and behold, the reviews come out, and it kind of feels like a transition architecture with some weedy bugs in it as well too, in regards to that power. So I feel a little bit vindicated, but I also think people really do need to calm down on any sort of hype for future products on any side, but especially regarding AMD products, because this kind of happens all the time. with their stuff. Not saying they make bad stuff, but they don't make bad stuff. But like, please, like, be a little bit more reasonable.
I feel like, considering that RDNA 3 first showed up in 2020 in the PS5, that it's kind of what you'd expect, right?
No.
Yeah, you're right. I should have really set my expectations regarding that, John. Right.
Oh dear.
Those cache scrubbers. Jeez.
Where do we begin with this? I think if you actually look at what they're doing at the actual engineering level, the whole chiplet thing, the concept that it works at all, I think is kind of borderline miraculous for a GPU architecture. So I think AMD deserve kudos there. I do think the evidence is mounting up that there are certain bugs in the driver and possibly in the hardware itself. In terms of the hype level, it all comes down to that 1.5 to 1.7 times slide. And that basically oversold the product, right? That was, and, that slide caused a huge amount of stuff like, reputable PC outlets were doing quote unquote projected benchmarks, which is a really, I couldn't believe that some of these guys who are really good at their jobs were doing that, because, you can't do that. A product performs as it performs, not as you project it performs based on, an up to performance figure. The other thing, of course, is the whole up to thing, which, my AMD contact told me, well, it's up to that depending on the power of your CPU. Clearly it isn't. I think that there is a genuine case now that they basically picked the highest performance differentials between two runs on the two separate architectures and said, well, this is the biggest increase.
Well, Rich,
let's run with that number.
Maybe it's more literal than you think. And when they say up to, they literally mean, those instances where you look up at the sky in a game and the performance on AMD just skyrockets. You know what I'm saying here? Up to.
When you look at the Dying Light benchmark, and it doesn't look great for AMD, but then the character looks up at the sky and suddenly the AMD result, the differential closes up quite dramatically, and it actually skews the average, which is quite an interesting sort of phenomenon. I think that the thing that I take away from it is that, I was actually pleasantly surprised at the leap in ray tracing performance, which does actually seem to be consistently good, whereas the gains in rasterization can range from extremely impressive to actually rather poor.
I think that's one of the best things, Rich, is like finally AMD has a card where the users can enjoy ray tracing.
They can actually turn it on.
It's not the fastest out there, of course, but it's good enough now where I think most games with ray tracing features can be enjoyed on these new cards, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's 3080 to 3090 Ti
exactly.
class.
That's good.
Those are great ray tracing GPUs.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, we've got some questions from supporters here, and I'm going to go through them. It is a lot about prices, as you'd imagine, because we are still talking about, effectively $1,000 cards. I think the biggest scandal from my perspective is that the 7900 XT is massively overpriced for what it is. The XTX isn't bad. But this question from Dan Roach: based on reviews of the 7900 XT and the 4080 16GB, the strategy from both AMD and NVIDIA appears to be increase prices across the board, inflating profit margins from the middle tiers. How long do you think it will be before both Team Red and Team Green realize the inflated prices during that period were the result of a perfect storm and not indicative of normal consumer demand for their products? So, Alex, what I think Dan's saying here is that they've overpriced these cards based on the sort of crypto boom price points that were established. Yeah. Do you think that holds water?
It holds a little bit, but also you've talked about countless times, Rich, that the price of producing these wafers and the fact that NVIDIA and Jensen commented on it himself before. So like the cost of the production is going up. But one thing your reviews talked about regards to the 4080, Rich, was that the price performance kind of goes down as you go down the stack, which is the opposite of what we want and the opposite of historical.
Yeah, and it's exactly what the 7900 XT does as well.
Yeah, and which is awful. And that's the awful part about all this. And I think the thing that actually may change it is a lack of demand. I think that is probably it. Just people not buying things that will force NVIDIA's, these are publicly traded companies and things like that. They have to answer not to just the CEO, but they have there's other concerns here. They have to, keep generating profit, and it's all about growth and all these things. They can't be contracting. So they have to figure out new ways to excite market demand at that point, and that may mean cutting prices, and it may mean introducing new products. There could actually arguably be a super line that comes out in the future, or something like that, or a TI line in the future for this generation, or the 50 series for AMD as well too. That could help rectify a lot of these issues we have regarding price performance. Maybe, but that's also assuming that the consumer pressures are high enough.
Well, the 4080 12 gig, which is now a 4070 Ti, it's essentially been confirmed at this point. The question is that still going to be a $900 card, or are they going to take a haircut on that? If it's $800, I can actually see it being quite reasonable based on the benchmarks we saw, factoring in cost per transistor, factoring in the fact that inflation is, it's a very real thing. You can't really ignore it. And maybe it'll hit the mark. I'm really interested in testing that card. This question from SJ33 in brackets, Jake.
Hi, Jake.
You always do that, Alex.
I like Jake. Jake's a good guy.
Hi, Jake. Hi, all. Both Lovelace and RDNA 3 are finally here, yet their high price means the previous generation cards remain as relevant as ever. Meanwhile, we're seeing recent PC game requirements begin to creep up, as you'd expect. This is despite the fact that most people are still buying 2-plus-year-old GPUs and won't be upgrading anytime soon. How sustainable is this? Is there a danger of PC game requirements outpacing the hardware that the average PC gamer actually has, especially with UE5 adoption taking off? Interesting question, right, Alex?
Yeah. So I think this is slightly in reference to Portal, The Witcher, and Callisto should not be used because we obviously know that it's a troubled product. And The Witcher is also a troubled product at this point, based upon my experience with the game. People reacted very negatively to my saying, "Don't turn everything to max" on The Witcher on Twitter. That says a lot. Yep. But I don't think there's a danger of this at all. Because at the end of the day, nearly everything is also releasing on console. The thing that we need to start demanding actually from developers is that they allow you to scale the game to run at console-like settings. A lot of games do not actually allow you to degrade the graphics especially as much as they do on console. Yeah, for Steam Deck, it's great for that, but it's also just good for the average PC user who just wants a good experience that looks fine enough, which is what consoles do. And we're already seeing that with things like The Witcher 3, for example. I'll mention it in parallel on my video, but you cannot, CD Projekt Red has told us, you cannot degrade the graphics with ray tracing on as much as they're degraded on console. They've literally told us that. They run special modes there. That's good from the perspective of we're getting
more features,
higher quality on PC, which we want, and more features, but it's bad for the mid-range on PC because they don't allow you to scale it down as much. There should always be more variable settings. It shouldn't just be ray tracing on or off. Right. It really shouldn't. There should be like a low and a high and maybe a medium, or a console, quality setting essentially. And that's the issue. I think it's more that, and we're not getting those options in games all the time, as well as honestly, it is a lot of user expectations. Just because your GPU from 2 years ago could run a game at ultra settings does not mean it can run at ultra settings in a completely different game 2 years later. So expectations, it's a lot of things. It's not just the market being outpaced by what GPUs people actually have, or whatever you're saying.
I kind of get it, but there's a lot of anger with this. I find I got a 3080. Why can't I do ultra settings? And they're just really mad about it. And I get that to some degree, but it's like, I do think there's a little bit. The PC market in the last 15 years is so different from what it was the prior 20, 30 years. And those of us that lived through those early days of PC gaming, it's such a different thing where games were constantly pushing new boundaries, and you wouldn't expect your 1-year-old PC to be able to max out the latest software. And it was more like, you look at man, I can't wait till I can run that someday. Not saying we want to go back there, but it's just a completely different thing where, a lot of people today expect their 2-year-old card should always be able to push things out. And it's That's why you're saying.
I guess that attitude also negates the concept of a game scaling itself to the future of PC hardware, which I think is not a great thing.
Not good at all. It's not at all what you want. Oof.
I think it's, this is kind of like why we champion optimized settings, right? This is what you need to get a great experience in the here and now. But once the horsepower is available to have, slightly improved shadows, by all means, turn it on.
So, Rich,
right?
When we started today, I was just talking about Battlefield 3 again. I don't know what made me think of it, but I just loaded it up on my PC just to see it. And, that was pushing boundaries at the time. People had to turn down settings, but it was very future looking. And you look at it now, and it's still a very attractive game, and it just runs like greased lightning on a modern PC, and it's cool.
And as a thing about it back then, that game was controversial because we were already in this era of anger at PC games. That
people were mad about performance.
People are so angry. You know why people were angry about it? It required DirectX 11.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Oh, do you guys remember that?
Yeah.
Wah, 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 wah. At this point in time,
you're gonna have heat coming at you.
I just can't take it. Like, we used to get a new DirectX level like every 1 to 1.5 years. Imagine that. Your GPU couldn't play a game. Like, imagine that. And we're not anywhere near that. The amount of outrage is a little bit absurd.
I mean, to be fair, though, I will say the cost of things has increased a ton. Like, graphics cards did not used to cost over $1,000 on average, right?
Yeah, that's the thing is there's no low range.
So
now.
I kind of feel bad in that sense. It's like, man, they're asking so much for this hardware. It's just the price. You can't just easily afford this stuff, right?
Yeah, I'd say like the thing is we really need so a lot of people on Steam are rocking like GTX 1650s. Is that what it's called?
1650 is now the number one card on the Steam hardware survey.
1650, baby.
Which
at the time I would have never said to buy it.
It's
honestly.
terrifying, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the weird thing, because I remember when Turing came out, it was like Turing, but without all the Turing, and I was like, oh my goodness, I don't know what this GPU, who this is for.
Everybody.
It's for mass market penetration is what it's for.
Most people.
And I think also there's a lot of laptops that are being counted in that. If you look at the Steam hardware survey, the 3060 for laptop is actually separated
really
out it's in the top 10, but more to the point, it's separated out from the 3060 for desktop now, whereas the 1650, I suspect it's basically, laptop and desktop lumped together.
Kind of like the GTX 1060.
I kind of gather though that by having this Halo product this time being the 4090, it has an effect on the consumers, where even when they're picking a lower end product, somehow it feels like it's like if they had a do you remember that? I think it was an Aston Martin that was based on like I can't remember what it was. It was like a small little car, like a smart car kind of thing, but it was like branded as Aston Martin. And you're like, you know what I mean? So it's like, it feels like you're kind of buying into what's perceived as the high end brand
quality.
And it's easier for you to pull the trigger on something like that. And maybe that helps with the popularity. I don't know.
I think that Aston Martin was a sales disaster, though. I know the one you're talking about. It was basically another car.
Yeah, it was another car rebadged.
And jazzed up a bit. Actually, this brings us all on to a question from leftist hominid. Linus of Linus Tech Tips recently decided to defect to Team Red in his personal rig, stating, paraphrased, that the loss in RT performance versus NVIDIA was significant but not a deal breaker. I was wondering if you all had any thoughts on this matter, particularly Alex. I do think it a bit odd that if you're as wealthy as Linus, you're not going to buy a 4090.
That was my thought.
That's what I was going to say.
Like, with all the hardware he has access to, and just the amount of money that he's bringing in, and just like, why would you not just go for the best card? It doesn't make any sense.
It makes a really good video, to say the least, and a video title,
baffling.
But that's about it. Yeah.
Well, what are your thoughts on this, Alex? I think there's something to be said for features. I mean, what's happening now is that NVIDIA are basically first to the market with all the key features, right? We had the machine learning based upscaling, and AMD followed suit. Frame generation, first generation technology, but it's improving all the time. They're first to the market with that. AMD have announced FSR3, which is essentially looking to catch up on that. The issue is when you're first to market with a feature and it's a feature that everyone wants and copies, then basically, inevitably, the guy who's there first ends up with more supported titles for that feature. So, ray tracing, for example, it runs better on NVIDIA. And I think a key part of that is because the games are developed on NVIDIA hardware. DLSS, machine learning based upscaling. We've got a good alternative from AMD, but it's supported in less titles. Like I said in the video, I can't go back to, FSR2 is a thing now. I can't go back to Control and use FSR2 in it.
Well,
I can't do that with Metro Exodus.
I think people found ways in some games to sort of inject that.
Yeah,
into...
the non-native support stuff.
I don't know how it works though.
It's not super successful always. There's more ghosting as a result of just the nature of how it works. And it's really cool that it works at all. And if you're okay with that, but it's not the equivalent of a native implementation, unfortunately. That would be really cool, but that requires a lot of stuff. I mean, in the end here, I feel like it is. I don't want to speak to it, but it feels like just a really good video topic and a video good. Really good way to generate talking about the subject in general, but I don't feel like there's the advantages you get from a top-end AMD rig are essentially a lower CPU overhead in a DirectX 12 title.
Yep.
Which
it has an impact at lower resolutions. So there have been some notable wins, particularly with extremely overclocked and undervolted 7900 XTXs at 1080p and 1440p.
So if you're like someone who literally just plays Fortnite at low settings at 300 to 400 FPS with no VSync on, I think that AMD 7900 XTX plus an Intel chip and not a Ryzen one, right? Because we all know that as you go up the higher stack in the Ryzen, you have to maybe turn off one of your CCXs for some game performance concerns at times, or using Ryzen Master or stuff like that, as well as the fact that the 13900K or KS or whatever it's going to be is going to be the fastest one. So that would be the perfect I only play multiplayer games PC at these settings. Presumably.
Alex, the thing is, so this is interesting. I watched a lot of videos on this card, and it really made me think that when you're looking at all the PC reviewers, you almost kind of have to align with the one that fits your needs, because all the PC reviews offer objective data, right? But then when it comes to the opinion piece, there's a lot of people that have a different interest in terms of what they want to play. And I think playing multiplayer only stuff at ultra high frame rates is perfectly valid. And there's going to be a subset of people that want to do that. And, that's going to vary from outlet to outlet. I think when we talk about this stuff, we're looking at a different sort of game, right? You're not playing those games, Alex. You're in it for something else. And I think that I actually like seeing all this variety in the reviews as a result of that. And you kind of get an idea of what people value most. But then again, and still with this Linus thing, it doesn't really seem like there's any, the 4090 is just better all around. And it's not like the XTX is actually trying to compete with it either, right? It's not designed to match the 4090. It's going for the 4080.
It's also a little bit of extreme diminishing returns in those rasterization titles, because we've talked about it before, where rasterization performance at this level is already kind of absurd.
And also often more limited by CPU than GPU. Yeah,
so that's the thing. And it's is 30 to 40 more frames per second at 200 FPS a much more, valuable investment at 1080p, for example, than being able to play the next gen game as well with ray tracing on and stuff like that. I don't know. That's something each viewer has to decide for themselves. But I would say I think if you're going the ultra high end, it kind of makes sense to go in one direction versus the other.
And I think there's a fair amount of people that want to do that. We're seeing it. They're excited about that Witcher 3 update and, stuff like Cyberpunk. Right? People want to push those graphics up. And, it's that's maybe a different crowd than the multiplayer only group.
Well, there's essentially now products for everyone. Yeah, right? I mean, if you want pure rasterization performance, at a certain price point, that's what you've got. And I think, that's the point I was trying to make in the review, which is that, depending on your priorities, there are perfectly valid use case scenarios for an XTX purchase rather than a 4080. However, on balance, I think the negative reaction to RDNA 3 in general suggests that maybe this concept of that particular balance isn't as widespread as we may have thought. But I guess we're going to wait and see what happens. I still think we need some sort of closure on why, Forza Horizon 5 and Gears, for example, the performance is basically scaling with power versus last gen. There's no architectural gains. Well, it's like,
it's
a
weird.
tiny architectural gain. So it is kind of weird to see those results. Is it a hardware bug? Is it a driver bug? Will things dramatically improve or not? That is the question. But yeah, I mean, certainly caused plenty of drama this week.
Yeah.
The thing is, everybody always wants the underdog to do well. I think that's
true.
That's kind of what's driving the interest in AMD here. And with RDNA 2, I know, John, you got some heat for saying that AMD weren't competing at the top end when the 6900 XT could kind of get within striking distance or even beat the 3090 and 3090 Ti. But very definitely it is the case now that top end is occupied by one player only with NVIDIA. So, there's compromises being made there. I'm going to be interested to see how the stack kind of works moving down, because as I said earlier, the 7900 XT is overpriced. And as I said in the review, I'm now concerned that everything going down the stack is going to be overpriced
as well. Yep.
So the first indication of whether that is true or not from the Green team is going to be this 4070 Ti and the extent to which
they would be very smart to keep that price down as low as they can.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll see what happens though.
Okay, next news topic. PC Returnal. We've been talking about it for months. I think the developer, Housemarque, actually leaked it themselves in a presentation. It is official. It is coming. And there's been a recommendation that the title should be running on PCs with 32 gigs of system memory, which is significant, is it not, Alex?
Yeah, that is significant. It may not be arbitrary. I mean, I do really think, so it can be completely arbitrary because minimum recommended specs haven't meant too much for a long time because they're not specific. They don't say what they're doing. But at the same time, I trust Housemarque a little bit in regards to certain aspects of this. For example, they mention, I just want to bring up the Steam page so that I actually have this in front of me. I believe it was a 5700 XT.
For what?
And a 2070S for the GPU recommendations.
It's 6700.
6700 XT, that's what it was. So
that's a meaty card.
It's a super meaty card.
As is the 2070 Super. So that is kind of like performance that's in line with the consoles.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like looking for, on the AMD side, it's quite a bit higher, actually. And the 2070 Super is around where I would put a rasterization level PS5 in a title that is more balanced. So not your weird, like Modern Warfare 2 or something like that. But, that's where I'd put it. The rest of it, though, 32 gigs, I'm trying to think of, honestly, where the game is doing a lot of weird stuff with memory. I don't have a profile in front of me, but like just thinking back to the game, you can go into like those matter transporters that move you around the level, but it like scrolls you through the level in like a stream.
Yeah.
So it's not like instantaneously going there.
It shows you moving, exactly.
It shows you moving, and I don't remember what happens when you go to between zones. Do you recall, John? Does it like bring you immediately Ratchet and Clank style through to another zone or something like that?
Remember, actually,
I don't recall if it does exactly.
I feel like I feel like there's a little bit of a loading point there, like short, but I don't think it's like you directly transition. I don't think you just transition from one to the other instantly or anything. But I can't remember. I feel like maybe falling down a giant hole and then landing at the bottom. It's been a year since I played through it. Yeah,
exactly. So I'm just 32 gigs is. A lot of PCs have 16 now. 32 is a bit excessive. for a game. It's not the first time we've seen this pop up and recommended. The very high and ultra high settings, or whatever they were, for Spider-Man Remastered also recommended, 32, but I didn't really ever see it skyrocketing in my
I'm more curious just to see how this
there,
runs in general, because Housemarque is typically known for doing some pretty crazy optimization, and there is at least a decent chance that this could be one of the few Unreal titles with minimal to no shader comp stutter, maybe. Like, I feel like these guys would be really acutely aware of that problem and want to avoid it.
I'm also, like, I'm worried just as much as everyone else about UE4 games whenever they come out, but I do get a feeling like this is a developer that knows a lot about technology. And so I think they would try and get rid of that completely. And I'm hoping they haven't. And we've also seen with the Callisto Protocol that if a developer is technically minded, they can do a lot about this really, really quickly. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. 32 gigs, all I'm going to say about this at the moment is just don't worry about recommended and minimum specs at all. Just never fret about them, because they don't mean anything unless they bring out like a really big bar chart that says, like they did with Porta RTX, and they're like, oh yeah, this runs at 1080p 60 on this rig at these settings, and they say it. Then that's really good. Man. But this doesn't tell us enough.
1632 though, it actually gives me nostalgia, because I read it almost as 16 megs versus 32 megabytes back. You'd often see that this game requires this, and it's better with 32 megs of RAM. Like, 32 megs of EDO RAM pumping that hot Quake action, Quake 3 even.
It's the best. There's a very funny thing at the end of the Steam thing. I'm reading it right now. Uncover the truth as you jump rapidly through portals between worlds. So maybe it's in the game and I just can't recall it that well. And then it says, comma, dependent on your PC setup. That's literally in the thing there. So we'll see. Maybe they chose to do a different way to do things on PC, so that's why it requires 32 for the optimized
I wonder
experience. We shall see.
It says SSD recommended but not required, so I'm very curious to see
maybe that's
how this behaves on a mechanical drive. It seems like if it was designed with SSD from the beginning, that could be tricky.
So that is the interesting thing, actually. So if they were actually benching your SSD or your HDD before the game starts, they could choose technically different paths about how they do loading.
Exactly.
Like in terms of like how much is reserved, how much is actually, loaded when you get into the game and all these things. So maybe that's what it's about, but we'll have to see. We'll just have to see.
I guess we're going to return to your manifesto for PC gaming in 2023, Alex. But these system requirements don't tell me anything really, other than you can run the game at on these components or equivalents. Doesn't tell me anything about the resolution and frame rate I'm going to be getting. So therefore, it's kind of pointless. But there we are.
We need that Windows Vista game performance index thing back.
Bring it back.
We're going to move on to a new topic now. Just quickly, we're going to be talking about High on Life, which released in a pretty dreadful state on Xbox consoles. We were all set to produce a video on it, and then they patched it literally on the day that John finished the video. The video is available now on for Patreon supporters to check out. There was no point putting it live for the general audience because it would essentially be, basically a critique of a game code experience that no longer exists. John, let's talk about this because there was some weird stuff happening in that game, right?
Yeah, so this kind of stuff has happened. It's plagued us a lot throughout 2022. Games releasing in a pre-release state or even at release with major issues and then getting patched, and it creates issues for creating videos. But this might actually be the worst one I've seen yet, in that it essentially, the difference was so vast that all the old B-roll I captured was useless. It didn't represent what the game looks like anymore. And I'm very happy that they fixed it, by the way, because I do actually like the game. It's pretty fun, I gotta say. But man, so the gist of it is that when it first launched on consoles, it had this problem where, I don't know if it's like a delta time issue or something else, where it's like one frame would move, say, like 5 pixels, the next frame would move 1 pixel, and it would repeat at that cadence, but not all the time. Sometimes it would actually look okay. Sometimes it would only affect camera movement and not strafing, and most of the time it affected everything. And it also affected animations. And animations would actually do something like you'd see them move 5 pixels one frame, but then like -1 pixel the next frame. So it would snap back. So it was almost like this like judder kind of like stair-steppy movement that was really unpleasant. And the whole game was just slammed with this. And the thing is, though, is like you see all the comments because people started playing at the same time I did, and they're like, "This runs like bad. This is bad. The performance is bad. What's going on?" Obviously, the first thing I did was pipe it into our frame rate analysis tool, and I was surprised to see on Series X, oh, it's actually a locked 60. Huh.
Yeah.
And it's because of this weird way that they're updating all the movement, where it effectively looks like an even jerkier version of 30 FPS. But it's actually updating the game every frame. So they like did the legwork to get this running at 60, but then something went wrong. And obviously it couldn't have been too severe because they fixed it very quickly. But as a result, all my old footage was recorded with this issue. So it just looked bad. It's choppy. It was really unpleasant. And I'm not entirely sure how games ship in this state. I know there's so many problems that come up throughout development. It's tough to ship anything at all, but this is something that is so obvious. Like you just play it for just 30 seconds and you're immediately wondering what the heck is going on. And it was unacceptable performance. And so all of that is covered in that video. So at least it's sort of like a showcase of what happened with it. And then I added bits to note that, okay, this has been fixed. But that's not to say everything's been fixed. The last gen versions did not actually receive much of an improvement. And they made a weird decision where it's essentially the frame rate's allowed to remain uncapped, but it's usually barely above 35 FPS. And it has an adaptive VSync. So if you're playing on like the 1X, it's just nonstop screen tearing, tons of judder. It just feels... It's so bad, and the loading time's so long after death, like 40 plus seconds often. I question why they released that version at all. Like, it's not pleasant to play. It's bad. It's a bad version of the game, which is to me unacceptable anyway, because it's not pushing any visual boundaries. And I don't understand what's going on there with the loading either, but clearly it was not optimized for the older Xbox One platforms. But thankfully now, if you play it on Series S or Series X, it's really, really smooth. It looks good. It's a lot of fun. I mentioned in the video that it reminds me of this weird, unholy mix of Ratchet and Clank in first person with BioShock Infinite. And a slice of Halo in there as well. Because the way BioShock Infinite, because it has this rail system everywhere. So you're like jumping up and like doing first person like rail sliding, where you like grab onto something, you jump onto another rail, you jump off, and there's these big arenas. Again, that's also a bit Halo-like. And like BioShock, you're using very strange weaponry. But then some of the weaponry, like the third gun you get, reminds me a lot of the Needler in Halo. And there's just... It's a weird eclectic mix. It also has Space Applebee's in it, which is pretty good. I enjoyed that. Yeah, it's... I guess there's also the PC version, which didn't have this problem to begin with, but it did have Alex's favorite problem, which was shader comp stutter. And that's a... so that's unfortunate.
But John, I got a number of comments on Twitter saying my PC does not have shader comp stutter in High on Life, so that means you're wrong.
That's like
and there's no issue.
That meme with the I don't believe you. What surprised me also about this game is the critical reception. The range is so vast, and I think it comes down to whether you can enjoy that type of humor or not. I did. I think it's pretty darn funny. I like what they did with it. There's even there's like a Red Letter Media thing in there. All the commentary in there is great. It's pretty darn funny. I mean, yes, there's a lot of dialogue during the game, and you can actually reduce that, but it's there's some good stuff in there. It's definitely worth checking out to see if that type of humor works for you. I love the introduction with what is it? It's Buck Thunder 2, where you're playing like a retro kind of inspired first-person shooter with some good dialogue in there as well. I mean, I don't know. I think it's worth checking out. It's one of the only Xbox console exclusive games this entire year. So also, if you have an Xbox, it's definitely worth checking out there. But I was genuinely shocked when I saw the Eurogamer review gave it an avoid, which you don't see avoids very often. But this last month has like shaken my my tastes, or like I know I have slightly quirkier tastes, but the last two games, I like High on Life and I like Callisto Protocol a lot, and many critics seem to despise them. I'm like, what's going on here? Like, am I so out of touch? No, it's the reviewers who are wrong.
Yeah.
I don't get it, man. I like bad games. There we go. You got me on record. So that's High on Life. It's a wild situation. I'm glad we were able to turn it into something, because when Rich sent me that message to say they patched it and it looks fixed, my stomach, like, I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, I was like 90% done with the video. I was getting ready to export in the morning and put it up that day, and then it's just like, nope, it's all invalidated.
Well, there's a lot of stuff coming in hot, right? And in terms of that issue with High on Life, my question to the developers would be like, where are your eyes? Come on. You've achieved a lot, 60 frames per second, but it clearly isn't presenting as
and this
60 frames
just
per
happened
second.
again. River City Girls 2, a cool pixel art beat 'em up. I like the original. This thing shows up. It basically has the same problem. This is a 2D side-scrolling pixel art game, and you're running it. It looks visually like 60 FPS. Certain like particle effects were full 60, and things like the background and sprites were all updating at different rates, and it just looks horrendous. And I'm just like, how do you not see this as an issue? And then they're like, oh yeah, we're already testing out a fix. And it's like, but why did it launch this way in the first place? This isn't some like small bug. This is like fundamentally affects the entire presentation of the game. And it's unacceptable. Like, I don't think that this is an acceptable way to release anything. And it's something we've not really seen that much before, where like such obvious issues. Like, yes, performance problems have always been a thing on some games, but that's usually an actual performance problem. Now we're actually seeing performance problems caused by just settings being misconfigured or some strange thing happening.
Well, there was talk of Callisto Protocol shipping with a wrong file in there.
Yeah, exactly.
Causing the problem on PC. So yeah, kind of bizarre. Okay, so we're going to close out the show with supporter Q&A. This is the part of the show where every week we put up a call for questions on our Patreon, and users come up with questions. We choose the best, or are the ones that we're most likely to be able to produce good answers to. We've had to re-record this one, and Alex isn't available. He's too busy doing the Witcher 3 content for PC, so there is a good reason for that. But John's here, and let's crack on with the questions. So the first question comes from Trans Tech Girl, and the question is this. I'll keep this short and sweet, which is always good. What game or games would you most like to see get the RTX remix treatment? Oh, interesting question, right, John?
Yeah, and I'm going to say what I said last time, basically, in that I'm going with the original Unreal and other Unreal Engine-based games from that era. That first generation of Unreal, I think, is a really interesting time. Those are still beautiful games, and man, I want to see Unreal get the RTX remix trees, but also stuff like, Klingon Honor Guard, the original Deus Ex. I mean, these have already a very rich modding community, so I can imagine that they're very interested in experimenting with this feature to see what's possible. I would assume it would work pretty well given the age of it, but stuff like that would be great. I still want to see the original Max Payne. Somebody was already experimenting with that. I think that'll be a neat one. I wonder if Max Payne 2 is possible. I can't remember what that uses.
Interesting. I think Alex mentioned Splinter Cell as well.
Yeah, the original Splinter Cell. I think it has a path that can run a DX7 path. The thing about that time is that a lot of PC games, so the Xbox had a GeForce 3 variant GPU in it, right? So it was bringing like DX8 style features forward in modern pixel shaders, for the time. But PC ports would often feature that, but they would also have to have like a fixed function path for other lower tier cards. And I think I saw somebody mention that games that are designed to run on a GeForce 2 are generally good candidates for RTX Remix. because the GeForce 2 cannot support those more advanced shaders and such. So anything GeForce 2 era is kind of like fair game, I would say.
Well, I'd like to see Quake 3 Arena. That should be doable, right?
I would think so.
But the holy grail for me, and I don't know if it's possible with RTX Remix, is basically everything that Sega ever did on Sega Model 1, 2, or 3 arcade boards, which basically means, well, the question is whether those, like the Supermodel emulator would actually be able to access that fixed function path. It's been around for decades, Supermodel. So possibly.
It really just kind of,
I don't know.
Oh man, that's a good question. I don't know how it's actually designed to work and how it calls the graphics card, and whether that could be, you could sort of inject this in there. I mean, emulators in general, I think, are an interesting option.
Absolutely.
GameCube would be great with Dolphin. I want to see Metroid Prime with this, but again, I'm not entirely sure if it's possible, if there is the older path available. PS2 maybe. I saw somebody doing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, the PC port, and that was actually looking pretty all right. I mean, everything's very reflective to begin with when you just go with it, but it's such a cool idea, and I really want to see what developers can accomplish with it, and just modders in general.
Absolutely. And obviously we had that teaser of Half-Life 2 using the Portal RTX files directly injected. I think that would be another fantastic candidate.
Absolutely.
Well, let's move on to the next question. This one from Gabe. As a 3070 owner who enjoys gaming on his LG C1, my biggest complaint with DLSS is that it has little to no impact on VRAM usage, despite the lower internal resolutions. I'd be interested to know why that is, and if there's anything NVIDIA could do about it, in theory at least. I think I'll take this one.
Yeah, please.
First of all, I think it's quite interesting to note that actually changing internal rendering resolution, it does have an impact on VRAM, but it's not as big as perhaps you would think. And the biggest consumer of memory tends to be texture resolution, right? Texture quality assets. The other thing is that with DLSS, you're still actually rendering quite a lot of stuff in native resolution, like post-processing can often be done in native resolution.
Right.
So it's kind of like a hybrid between resolutions, and you're still going to be using, I mean, let's say you're using DLSS up to 4K, you're still going to be drawing upon the highest quality textures, which is the main occupier of VRAM. So I suspect that's why you're seeing that, and I'm not sure there's much NVIDIA can do about it. I guess you as a user could turn down texture quality, but I'm not sure you'd want to at something like 4K resolution.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why I think we're going to be seeing larger VRAM allocations proving more useful moving into the future. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Andre Nering. The software you use to make the performance analysis is built by yourself, right? Right. I can bet many people would love to have access to it, like other content producers and maybe even game developers, to help them identify common issues. Out of curiosity, didn't you ever think about releasing it to the public somehow? It could become popular if open sourced. Even if paid, some people would possibly be willing to pay for it, and it could be an extra cash source for DF. So this is an interesting question, right, John? Because obviously, I built these tools, and then you came along a few years later and started using them. And I think the bottom line is that it's not a one size. It's not a completely automated solution that's going to tell you everything you need to know about the frame rate of the game, right? So what do you make of this question?
Yeah, the big problem here is that it's not an automated process, and there's a lot that can go wrong. And every time you run a game through there, different games, because it's essentially reading just what comes out of the HDMI port, it has no sort of like internal connection to the game itself, right? And things can go wrong with that HDMI, including, some consoles with the dithered output. The PS3 is famous for this. Depending on how screen tearing manifests, there's so many different variables that can essentially cause bad data. And if you don't know, it's not, you can do an analysis, but maybe not notice that, some of this data is bad, and just put it out there. It really takes
Which
a careful.
Has happened a lot.
Yeah, it takes a careful. Not with us though.
I think that's basically it. I mean, Well, I started off doing frame rate analysis in like 2008 with really basic command line tools that would scan like an AVI file that you capture losslessly from the console. And it quickly became evident that you needed some way to do error checking. There's actually a video on the channel about how we analyze console performance, and it actually shows you the various tools we've got. And a lot of the effort in creating this tool wasn't so much about refining the algorithm, although that did happen. It was actually about being able to check and double check that the data is correct. Because a lot of things can happen. And there is actually an open source frame rate analysis tool called Teardrop, and I recommend you check that out. And it is the sort of tool that's used by a lot of people. And I guess it would be fine for like VSync games, assuming that you're giving it the right inputs. Quite a lot of people actually just were inputting like lossy data into it and getting false positives on performance drops, stuff like that. And basically, I think the bottom line in answering this question is that the tool's only as good as the person operating it in a lot of scenarios. And you're quite right, John. There are some consoles that have like we'll put it this way. You've got an HDMI port. It's a digital output. So in theory, if you have two frames that are the same, then the data should be identical from one frame to the next.
Right.
And therefore you can find a drop frame. But as we've seen, you mentioned the PS3. The PS5 actually does it in one of its modes.
Yeah, one of its modes.
Where an identical frame isn't identical. And so, if you just blindly trusted the tool, every game would be running at 60 frames per second when that's clearly not the case.
And I think that's the reason the tool shouldn't be made available, really. That's the risk anyway, is that we wouldn't want a bunch of data appearing with our graphs and these tools that's wrong. Because that already happens a lot with Teardrop, where I've seen tons of videos out there that just the results aren't correct, and it's just down to user error. It's not, I don't think it's intentional by any means. It's very easy to make those mistakes, especially when the errors are only minor, like it's like, oh, it's missing tears or something, or it's reporting false positives and that kind of stuff. So it's tricky. Mm-hmm. It's tricky.
I mean, I looked at Teardrop a couple of years ago and I noted that there was no way to actually check for errors. It was just input and output from what I remember. Maybe it's changed since then, but that's the reason we don't supply our tools, because, basically it's not a foolproof solution that bad data could get out, and we don't want our name associated with it, really.
Yeah, exactly.
We got a final question here from Garten Weiss. It's for Alex, actually, and Alex isn't here, but we do know what Alex would,
we know what he said.
Here. We did ask him. Yeah. Alex, would you rather play a game with awesome ray tracing effects with the caveat that it has #stutterstruggle, or a game without any ray tracing but perfect performance? He wouldn't go near a game that has stutter struggle but awesome ray tracing. I think was the
answer. So the performance is the most important aspect for him. And
absolutely,
stutters aren't worth the hit just to have beautiful ray tracing. So,
unless he had the shader butler, of course, who would come in and play the game for him and pre-cache all the shaders. Exactly. But no, he's definitely performance first there. I think it's something we all agree with, right? There's
absolutely
no real controversy there.
Exactly.
Okay, so we answered a bunch of questions here. We answered some more in the RDNA 3 part of the show, but I think that's going to be enough for this week. So yes, indeed. That's it. That's the end of the show. If you enjoyed it, please do like, subscribe, share, ring the bell for those notionally instant notifications. No guarantees, never any guarantees there. That is my disclaimer. DF supporter program. Join us to become part of the show. Submit your questions and get early access to the show. All manner of goodness on the supporter program, of course. Early access to a bunch of stuff, bonus materials, amazing DF retro content. There's a lot going on there. But that's all from us for this week. Thanks for watching.